Hey folks, my name is Mo Amir and this is VANCOLOUR, British Columbia's bona fide culture and politics TV talk show. We're dedicating tonight's entire show to British Columbia's longest and still ongoing public health emergency, BC's toxic drug supply crisis. Since April 2016, when our province first declared this public health emergency, more than 14,000 people throughout BC have died due to illicit street drugs whose supply is so toxic and lethal, it kills users nearly instantly, with even naloxone, a life-saving medication that can reverse opioid overdose, being ineffective at times. Sadly, the death toll of people in our communities keeps rising, with 2023 being the worst year of the crisis in BC, accounting for over 2,500 deaths. But is our province actually treating this crisis as the emergency that it declared 8 years ago? A stunning piece in the Tyee this month revealed that the BC Coroner's Service conducts autopsies in just 15% of suspected overdose cases, leaving many families with painful questions that will never be answered. The journalist behind the story, Tyee reporter Jen St. Denis, returns to the show to talk about it, and she's joined by another returning guest, a co-founder of DULF, the Drug User Liberation Front, and the host of the Crackdown podcast, Garth Mullins. Garth, Jen,
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again.
So Jen, I want to start with you. When someone dies because of a suspected drug overdose or drug poisoning, what is the procedure at the coroner's service? Because I imagine they have to do a toxicology report, right?
Yeah, obviously the toxicology report is like a key part of the death investigation. So what happens in BC is we have a lay coroner system, which means that we have a bunch of coroners who do have special training, but they don't have a medical background. So they go to the scene of the death. They will sometimes do an examination at the scene, or they'll do an examination maybe at a morgue. They'll also interview the family and the person's family doctor to establish, did this person have a history of drug use? Was there drug paraphernalia at the scene? And then they will do a toxicology test. But on that basis alone is sort of in BC how they determine, yes, this was a drug overdose. And that's not actually how other provinces do it.
So is the autopsy then like the next level of that? So beyond the toxicology report, the autopsy can actually teach us more about these deaths?
Yeah, that's right. The autopsy is considered, by forensic pathologists, it's like the most accurate way to determine how someone has died. And so what forensic pathologists say is that in most other jurisdictions in North America, in fact, I think some of them have said in all jurisdictions except for BC, the practice is to do quite a high number of autopsies for suspected drug overdoses and also alcohol deaths in some cases too. So it ranges, it's from 60% in Newfoundland to 100% in Ontario of doing an autopsy for every
And just 15% in BC.
And then just 15% in BC. So it's sort of shocking to realize that the BC Coroner Service is doing this practice that's not really in line with what other coroner and medical examiners do. And their explanation is just kind of we think toxicology is good enough. We think that we do a good enough job. We have, expedited testing. They do 2 rounds of it. But forensic pathologists sort of are we beg to differ.
Garth, you're on the front lines of this crisis. When you hear this news and you saw the piece that Jen produced, what are your thoughts that BC only conducts autopsies in 15% of these drug overdose cases?
I mean, I don't really know how all of this stuff works. I don't know how conclusive a toxicology is at proving that someone's fatally overdosed. But what I wonder, and what lots of people in the community wonder, is obviously the vast majority of overdose deaths are exactly what you see happening. People using drugs and dying because the drug supply is toxic and unregulated. But occasionally we'll worry, did somebody get hot capped? Which means, was someone intentionally overdosed by someone else?
Oh, okay.
And maybe you miss that if you only do the tox screen and not the autopsy. But I don't know. And I'm not trying to create this idea that this is a huge problem. But occasionally you see it. And then sometimes we have people, I've had a friend who, they ruled her death a fatal overdose, but she also had other medical conditions. And we could never, especially her partner could never be entirely sure that was what was happening.
It strikes me as interesting that, again, in a quote unquote emergency, we're not doing autopsies on 100% of cases of people that are suspected to have died from drug poisonings, drug overdoses. Does that sort of surprise both of you as well?
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest health crisis in our province right now. It's the highest death toll, and like Garth just said, aside from the concerns, and I hear those all the time too, the concerns about actual homicides being missed. Just the public health element. Often people who use drugs have other things going on with them, other chronic health conditions. I talked to Karen Ward, another drug policy advocate, who said, well, what about the guy who might have had a stroke? What about the guy who might have had lung cancer? When you're not going inside the body and looking inside, you're not seeing those things that are important for public health. I talked to a forensic pathologist in Ontario who said, we want to know if somebody died of diabetes, even if they were also using fentanyl, because we're tracking that. We're tracking how many diabetes cases we have.
You also talked to some people in the BC government, and you brought this to them and asked them why we were only doing 15% of autopsies in these cases. Yeah. What was their response?
Yes, I did chase after Mark Farnworth in a parking lot and really put it to him. His stance is like, we want to leave this to the coroner. We trust the chief coroner, who, as I emphasize, is not a doctor in BC. We've had like a series of police officers, and then Lisa Lapointe, our most recent coroner, was a lawyer. And he's like, we're going to leave it to the coroner. They're the experts. But he never really explained to me why that was acceptable to have this practice in place that is not the same as what other jurisdictions do. So that's something I'm still really have outstanding.
Garth, I want your response on that.
BS, Minister. I call BS on that. We trust the coroner. The chief coroner, Lisa Lapointe, has come out with our program at the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users almost 100%, but completely independent of us, just based on the evidence. She's calling for safe supply and even non-medical safe supply rolled out quickly and urgently. She was even sort of in a coded way sympathetic to Dolph's struggle. So for Minister Farnworth to say, oh, you just trust the coroner to do what's right. No, they have not been taking up the recommendations of the coroner. So for this one thing where it happens to save the government some money, for him to selectively say, oh, on this one place, we're going to trust the coroner. I don't know.
Jen, do you think that's what it is that autopsies cost money and the government either just doesn't have the funding or doesn't seem to have the will to put the money towards it?
I don't know if that's the answer. I think that's the one thing we always look to. I've done kind of a back of the napkin per capita cost of like all across Canada, how much we spend like dollar per dollar on each resident. So a per capita breakdown. BC isn't really that much of an outlier in terms of like less or more. We're kind of in the middle. Okay. So I'm not sure if it's maybe just, I know that I've heard from forensic pathologists that they feel kind of sidelined by the BC Coroner's Service, that their advice is not really being listened to the way it should, that it's not a medically driven system. And so, I'll be doing some more stories looking into that angle as well, but I'm not really 100% sure on what exactly is happening here.
After your report, after your piece in the Tyee, did you have the feeling that Minister Mike Farnworth, the Solicitor General, was actually aware that only 15% of autopsies were conducted in suspected drug overdoses?
I don't think this had ever been raised before. The fact that BC is completely doing something completely different than other provinces. And it really is, I think I talked to every single province except for Quebec and PEI were the only ones who just didn't get back to me. And our numbers are really just so much lower. And so, there's this thing that kind of goes on in BC sometimes where there's a bureaucratic inertia that I find where you can raise a problem again and again. So that's why we really tried to craft our story in a way that people would take notice. And we had like real life examples too of how this had affected families and just left them with these questions.
Garth, really quickly, we got about 30 seconds here. Do you feel like there is a bureaucratic inertia? I mean, you're on the front lines. You are also doing your own reporting. When you raise issues, is that something that you run into?
100%. We've had extreme trouble moving things through the system. Big things, small things. So yeah, for sure.
When you hear about this idea of an oversight committee by the government to look after safe supply and safe supply diversion, what are your thoughts? Is this actually going to help in reducing drug deaths?
I mean, this is all just a sensationalism coming out of like the big drug bust that happened up in Prince George. The RCMP seizes a bunch of drugs. puts them on the table. Everyone freaks out in the media. Government says, oh, we got to have a committee to solve the problem. It sounds like the same old pattern to me. If you looked at those drugs, it's a bunch of different pills, you know, and they don't know, even if they got a prescription bottle, they don't know whether those are safe supply pills or not.
Right.
You look at Dilaudid, most of those Dilaudid prescriptions, like something like 85,000 of them, come from people who are getting them for pain, you know, so, and those people also do sell and divert pills, and they have forever, and it's never been a big political problem. Second, we're involved, then it becomes lightning, right? So I used to buy Dilaudid way before, like in the 90s, and, you know, you get it because little old granny is selling her prescription for her hip pain. And she does that the same reason most people do it, because people are broke and they need to get food. So the idea of having a committee to oversee drug users who are getting safe supply prescriptions, that makes me think of like eight bureaucrats crowding into a room with me while I piss in a cup to make sure that I'm using them properly. And I really don't want that, you know?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point, that diversion for pharmaceuticals has always happened. And when you look at these specific drugs, they're prescribed in far greater numbers when it comes to other things aside from safe supply. Jen, I want to ask you about the opposition parties here in British Columbia, BC United and the BC Conservatives. They seem to really be focused on this idea of safe supply diversion, and they almost seem to be ignoring the number of deaths that still happens. Are they missing the plot here?
Well, I think they found an issue that's a real, like, political, they think, winner for them. So
it's political.
I think so. I mean, they've really, the way they hammer on safe supply, kind of ramping up these fears also of like organized crime being involved. I don't know, whenever I hear, you know, Eleanor Sturko is kind of the BC United MLA who has really taken the torch on this and really run with it. And she constantly brings up, you know, organized crime with safe supply. You know, safe supply is prescribing prescription drugs to a really, really small number of drug users in BC. And, you know, I personally, like, as someone who does report on the downtown east side, I have frequently run into horrific stories of actual organized crime violence that's horrific, and it's connected to the illicit supply, not to safe supply. So I would just kind of question, like, where are our priorities going? Is this really warranted, this amount of laser-like attention on this issue?
Oh man, they're trying to solve a different problem than me.
Okay.
I'm trying to stop people I know, everybody who's a drug user in this province from dying, right? That's the problem that we're trying to solve. They're trying to solve a get elected problem, or a stampede people with fear to the right side of the voting spectrum problem, or I don't know, make it so that poor people are no longer visible in the neighborhoods problem, but they certainly don't seem very seized with the dying problem, because they never have an answer for that. They never want to address it. And there's just way, way more fentanyl around than there is anything else.
With this committee in particular, it seems like the government and some of the opposition parties they just want more accountability. And Garth, you did mention this idea of a urine test. They're also talking about putting chemical.
They already do. Yes, okay. I mean, my God, I'm on just on methadone, and I have to have, every time I go to the clinic, urine test. People are on hydromorphone, getting urine tested all the time. This already happens. See, these people on the right, they don't even have a clue how the system actually works.
It sounds like this is all smoke and mirrors then, at least in terms of how it's being discussed.
Scare people into voting for Eleanor Sturko and Kevin Falcon and Pierre Poilievre and whoever's next.
Does it worry you that there is going to be a crackdown on harm reduction?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, if we're going to see Pierre Poilievre win the next federal election in 2025 or before then, and he's going to win with a big, huge majority probably, and he's going to go and wipe out harm reduction. And that's the same thing that really Eleanor Sturko and these other people want to do in a slightly lesser, kind of more polite BC kind of way.
Pierre Poilievre, since you brought him up, has talked about no free drugs, but free treatment. I mean, I think that appeals to some voters who may not be that well-versed in the issues. Why doesn't that work?
Well, I think it appeals to voters, you know, who you say appeals to voters who are not well versed in the issues. I think it appeals to voters who have seen their loved ones struggle with addiction. I think there is, like, you know, a large number of people who are just like, listen, if my loved one could just stop taking the drugs, that would solve our problem. But the issue is that it's just such a simplistic solution. We know that people struggle in treatment. They often relapse. They often have to do it again and again. Some people never successfully go through treatment. I think that's what we've seen over the years, and why there are now these sort of like different ways of treating addiction that addiction doctors endorse, like Safe Supply, I think it's because we have seen that model of treatment just not work. It's not a one-size-fits-all model. And in this this reality of the drugs being so dangerous, every time someone relapses, they're at risk of dying.
Garth, Jen, thank you so much for your time tonight. I think this was very illuminating and definitely shed some light on this hot button topic. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Mo.
Folks, that was Jen St. Denis and Garth Mullins. They're among the leading voices covering BC's longest public health emergency, as they both produce incredible, eye-opening work. Find Jen's work at the Tyee online and search for Crackdown Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts for Garth's work. Now, up next, you may have heard of the story about a major drug bust in Prince George, we referred to it just now, seizing Safe Supply drugs. Or perhaps you heard the reactions to that story from politicians both in this province and across the country. Well, I'm going to react to those reactions up next.